So we have today Goldenrod is our flower of the day, and we're gonna do a couple little drawing tips and techniques, and then I'm gonna go right into the watercolor because I think Goldenrod lends itself really well to this loose kind of flowing watercolor. So I'm gonna show you a couple of tips. So let me know in the comments: are you gonna paint or draw along with me? Are you just gonna watch? Okay, I think that's it for now. Intros, hellos. Okay, let's go. Let's get into this. So one of the things I want to show you guys today is a quick and easy way to draw leaves, especially leaves that have a little fold in them. So if you actually have a pen or a pencil nearby, I would definitely encourage you to do along with this because this is going to blow your mind how easy it is to draw a leaf that has a little bend to it. So the first thing we're going to do is just talk about leaves, and leaves will always follow one line. So that's like the center line of the leaf. And so I'm going to draw that center line with a dotted line, a dashed line, so that you'll be able to see what I mean. And so just basically, if you were going to do just a basic leaf, right, you'd have that center line, and then you would have the leaf connect at the top and bottom of that line. Like that. And that center line is always going to go through. Okay, and you're kind of mimicking both sides. So that's a very easy leaf that I just drew. But what if we wanted to do one that is folded over? So I would say watch me do this real quick, and then I'll do it again, and you should do it along with me because you're going to be impressed with what you can do. So I'm still going to draw that center line, and I'm going to do it so that it kind of looks like a hill. Okay, so that kind of looks like a ski slope or something. Then I'm going to go a little bit to the left of that line, and I'm going to draw that same shape like this. It's going to cross over, and it's going to come down and meet that dotted line right at the tip. And then we're going to draw that same line, but almost copy paste it. Okay, so we're going to take this line. You can imagine you right click on it, copy, paste, and then we're going to move it over. So it's going to start right here and do the exact same thing and come down and meet that tip right there. Okay, and then we would draw a line across here and have this part down here come together in a stem, however you want that stem. And you can see that that leaf is bending over. Now that leaf actually is going in either direction. If you were to erase this line or this line, it would change it. So let's just shade this in like this so that you can kind of, you're not going to want to see right through that leaf. Okay, and then we have our leaf bending over this way. Isn't that cool? Very simple. Now, you can change the lines that you do, right? So if I did that dashed line like this, and I did kind of a wavier thing, right? So we still have our leaf bending over, but it just has a little bit of a different shape to it. So there's all different ways you can play with this. But the main thing to remember is that every leaf will always have like that center line that you're following. Okay, and we can do that either way. So let's have it go the other way. We have our dashed line like so, and we're going to have our first leaf line like that. Copy and paste that over, and there we have a leaf folding in the other way. Okay. So how many of you drew that along with me, and are you already impressed by your leaf drawing ability? Let me know in the comments. Okay, let me know. And then also, do you want to know another way to draw a leaf? Would you like another drawing shortcut for how we can do another folded over leaf? I have a couple more up my sleeve. Sherry raised her hand. Lori says, got it. Joanne says, I did, and everything is nice. Okay, awesome. I love it. All right, I'm going to give you another leaf drawing tip. So this one is actually a little bit easier. Let's pretend that this is our flower stem. Okay, and so we have our leaf coming out of here, and what we're going to do is draw that hill again, like this. Okay, and then we're going to just have a little tiny thing, a little line, a little hill coming out of there and meeting it at the tip. And then we're going to draw a straight line right here. So in this example, that center line of the leaf is actually down here, right? That's the main vein of the leaf. But in this case, we're going to see it really clearly. And let me do that from the other side. So we're going to have that hill kind of come out like this. Okay, it's kind of like an elongated S shape. Then we're going to have another little hill come out and meet the tip of that. And then draw a straight line back to the stem. So you can see how that leaf is kind of twisted over. And the cool thing is, once you have the basic shapes down, it's really easy to elaborate on that and then make it more complicated. So now you know the basic way that a leaf can twist, and so you could draw that in pencil, but then you can go over it and add things. So if you wanted this leaf to have a serrated edge, you could go over those edges and make it serrated and add some interest to that leaf, okay? You could add the little ridges that sometimes show, the little veins that sometimes show up on a leaf, okay? There's all kinds of things that you can do to make it more interesting, but you just need to grasp that basic shape first, okay? This marker is running out of ink, so I'm gonna switch to my handy black Sharpie. Okay, let's do one more leaf, and then I'm going to move on to the next section of this, but I like this one. So this one, let me draw it real quick first, and then I'll walk you through step by step. So this one is gonna have kind of like a, I kind of call it like if you couldn't draw a heart, like if you weren't very good at drawing a heart or a bat or something, and then you're gonna have a line coming out of it here, and a line coming out of it here, and that leaf is just kind of bending over, okay? Let me show that again. So you're gonna draw this kind of messed up bat shape, or heart shape. Then you have a line coming out, and it's basically, I'm lining up, I'm kind of ghosting over, okay, like this, and then going back up to meet that corner. And then there's our vein. So the center line of this would be going like that and down. So you can still see there's a dotted line of where it's going. So let's do that one together again. Okay, have that heart shape. Line coming out of the center, a line coming back up, draw the stem of it, and then you could even add that center vein in and have those lines coming out of it to show that it's a leaf. Okay. Cheryl says, where would the dark go on the last leaf? And I think you're talking about this leaf, Cheryl. So let me show you. I'll draw it again real quick so that those lines aren't there. We have that line, this line, and then a line going back in. So it depends on where your light is coming from, but what I would normally do is light is normally going to come from somewhere above it. So I would have it a little bit darker on the bottom and a little bit darker where it bends so that you can see the shading. So I would have it, the darker part, whether you're watercoloring or doing it with pen or pencil, kind of here at the bottom like that. A little bit here where it's folded over just to give it some shape, and then a little bit where that one part of the leaf overlaps the other. Okay, that is what I would do. So I would keep the highlight right here in the center and kind of on top of that. Hopefully that helps. Okay, so why did I show you all these leaf shapes? Because if you're going to draw goldenrod, you're going to have these leaf shapes somewhere on your plant. Goldenrod is about half flower, half of those little yellow things, and half leaves. So it's a good experiment or a good exercise to practice your leaf drawing today when we do goldenrod. So let me just move my paper over a little bit. And, oops. Oh, you guys didn't see that. I just spilled water all over everything. Well, I mean, if we've learned anything at this point during this week, it's to plan for Alex to not have technology work and for her desk to be a mess. That's what happens when you have water everywhere. Okay, let's move on. Haha. Okay, so when it comes to drawing our actual goldenrod, we want to have that guideline just like I normally tell you to have a guideline, okay? So the guideline is going to be very roughly, and I'll often just sketch a very rough guideline at the beginning so that I know what I'm following when I do my drawing or when I do my painting. So the guideline very roughly is going to be that it has a stem, that it has some leaves coming out of it. So I'm just going to draw some really rough leaves. And then if we look at the goldenrod picture that I sent you a little while ago, you'll see that the actual flowering part of this flower is kind of like, it comes out on different parts of the stem like this, and that's the green part. And it just comes out in different ways, and it kind of flops over. And then on top of those stems is where a lot of the flowers are. Okay, so sometimes I'll just draw something like this, and it's not meant to be very beautiful or anything, but it just gives me an idea of what we're working with. Okay, so that's my very rough idea, my very rough sketch for this, and I'm going to switch to a different pen here and a pencil so that we can do this together. And so I would use a pencil to kind of sketch out where the stem will be and where these things are coming out of. And the reason I would use a pencil is because the stem is going to be a little covered up by some of the flowers. So I don't want it to be too dark or impossible to erase. Okay? And then I'm going to have my leaves down here, and I'll get to those in a little bit. So when we're doing our little flowers here, I always say when we do a botanical drawing, you kind of practice each part and master each part, and then when you combine it together, that's when it starts to look good. So looking at a reference photo of goldenrod flowers, I know that there's a bunch of little tiny flowers that come out of here, and they kind of are on a little stem, and then they just have a lot of petals and a lot of little, well, they have a lot of pollen, frankly, because I'm very allergic to goldenrod, even though it's pretty. So you can just practice getting those little things, having them go in different directions. And it's almost like we're drawing a bunch of little trees or little broccoli florets. Okay? But then on your actual drawing, you're going to start to draw those. And I'm going to do that first before I even draw the stem underneath them, because the stem is going to be a little bit hidden. Let me zoom in. The stem will be a little bit hidden once these little flowers are here. So just tiny little flowers. And it's kind of easy to get lost in the detail of this, and I find that very relaxing. So some of those you're going to draw behind the others. Some will be really clear. On the whole, they mostly are on the top of the stems on the goldenrod plant. Sometimes they'll get, toward the end, they'll kind of angle down a little bit. Like this. Okay, and I'm just going to fill this in. So I'm just using that guideline, that basic pencil line there, just as a rough guideline of where these little flowers are going. Okay, and then toward the end, I'll start to actually draw in that stem, but it's kind of going in between some of them. Sometimes the flowers cover it up a little bit, so it's a good idea to wait on that one. Okay, and the same way that then after I have this finished is when I would draw this part of the stem in so that I can make sure I don't have anything covered up too much. Okay, so I would go ahead and do that repeatedly over this entire plant here. And then when it came time to do the leaves, you can sketch them out in pencil first if you want. Okay, so especially if you're new to it. So I'm going to go ahead and make the leaf the way I showed you that last one, or the second to last one. I kind of have it go like that, and I'm making it a little bit narrow because the leaves are a bit narrower. And then you can go over that in pen like that. Okay, and connect it to the stem. And once it's dry, I haven't let it dry enough, but let's go for it. Once it's dry, you erase your pencil, and everything looks much tidier and neater once you erase your pencil lines. Okay, and then of course your final steps are going to be the contour lines and the shading. So you can just add your contour lines like this. Okay, you could add them like this. There's no right or wrong way. You could do the stippling, which is all the dots. So there's lots of ways you can add some cool visual effects in. So that is your drawing tip for the day. And now we're going to switch and talk about watercolor real quick. So with watercolor, let me zoom out a little bit here. Okay, so with watercolor, we're still keeping that basic shape in mind, right? That loose shape I sketched out of the pencil and the branches. We still want that in the back of our mind because the shape is the same, and you can paint loose flowers a lot more effectively if you have the right shape already going into it. Okay, so I'm going to grab, I have a few different paints here. This paint palette is a few years old, and I found it a few days ago, and I was like, oh, the paint is perfectly good. Why wouldn't I use it? This is my palette of core paint that I enjoy using. Okay, so let me grab my paintbrush. What I have here is my Anna Mason by Rosemary and Company, and I have number 5 spotter brush. And I have a jar of water that has proved to be troublesome in that I have spilled it twice already today. Okay, so we're just going to put a little water in these pans here like that. Just a few drips. And then I'm going to grab this yellow. This is nickel yellow here. And I want a few different kinds of yellow. So I'm also going to grab, I have some lemon yellow in this palette. I'm going to grab some lemon yellow. Normally when I paint, I work my way up from the lightest to the darkest shades. So I'll probably start with that lemon yellow. And then I have some quinacridone gold over here. And that will be even darker. I love quinacridone colors. They are absolutely so beautiful, so vibrant and transparent. Okay, it's been like 5 minutes since anybody has commented, and I need to know that you're all still there and can hear me and can see me, because I worry. After this week of technology problems, I worry that I'm just talking to myself now. Oh, I'm also going to grab, let's see, am I going to grab it? I'm not going to grab it because I don't know where it is. I was going to say I'm going to grab a pipette and add some water to this palette, but I can use my brush to do that. And see, this particular green paint hasn't been used in, I am saying, at least 2 years and probably 3. And see, it just reactivates right away. Love that. Okay, good. Thank you guys. Thank you for letting me know. I see your comment. Sherry says she's still here. Pat says she's here. Okay, Lori, Cheryl, Sandy. All right, just checking. Just checking. I have been known to continue on for some time talking to myself. So what I want to show you today is wet into wet and how that looks with a loose flower. And this is kind of a bit of a challenging technique, but it is really fun once you get the hang of it. So in my head, I roughly have the image of the goldenrod flower that I'm going to make. And what I'm going to do is just start putting dots of water down where I know the flowers are going to be. Okay, so I'm just putting little dots of water down. And then I'm going to take some of this paint and just drop it in like this in a few different dots. So I'm not like broadly going in huge brush strokes over it, just a few dots, because I want there to be some variation in color. So I'm going to put a little bit of that darker one in as well. And that's going to mix together really nicely. And that's just one of those branches. So I'm going to do that a few times. So the first thing I'm doing is just water, and I'm keeping that general shape of goldenrod in my head. Okay, and again, this is a bit of a more challenging technique, but I know that we have all different skill levels here, and it's kind of fun, I think, to see different techniques. You know, even if you don't feel confident in them yet, I think it's a good idea to be exposed to them so that you can have them in the back of your mind as you improve and as you learn new techniques. So just water here, and the stem will be there in the center in a minute. Okay, my water has a little bit of a yellow tint to it, and that's fine because we're going with yellow anyway. Okay, drop in some paint. I'm going to put a little bit of lemon yellow in here also. Okay, and that actually had a little bit of green in it, but that is also fine. The cool thing about doing these loose flowers is that you can really just relax with it, and I think it's quite fun. And this is a lot of not fancy brush strokes. This is just really dropping your color right into those water droplets. So hopefully you can start to see. Hi, Bobby. I see you just said you just jumped on. Good to see you here. Alice says enjoying the drawing techniques. Good. Alice, do you find that you enjoy drawing more than painting? Okay, so hopefully you can start to see where the branches of this goldenrod are kind of coming into play. So still just water, you know, and I have a loose idea of where my stem is there. I'm going to do one that's kind of coming out of the front because, of course, they don't all just come out of the side like that. So that's going to be a little bit broad. The perspective will change on that one. We'll come down just a little bit. Then if I have one sort of coming out from the back, just lightly back there. Now I am using a lot of water, and I'm not going to pick the paper up or anything because it would drip. And if you've ever gone to one of my watercolor classes, I'm always telling you, you don't want your water dripping down the page. And that is true for most techniques. But for this technique, we actually do want a lot of water because the way it will dry is going to be really interesting. The pigment will stay within that water, but it's going to be really interesting watching the way that it moves the pigment around. The water will evaporate, and it's going to leave us with some really cool patterns in the paint, especially if you're adding a few different pigment colors in as you go. Okay, and you do want lots of white space in between those because that's what's going to let the eye know that there's detail in there. There's things that you might not see right away. Okay, now if you're up for it, I'm also making it just a bit darker. I don't know if you've noticed along the bottom of these. And that's because less light will be getting to the bottom. If it's just out in a field, you know, it's going to be brighter on top and a little darker on bottom. So that's just another thing to keep in mind as you paint it. Okay, and I like that. I think that's looking pretty good. I want a few little more sprigs up here. I want those to be a little bit lighter because I know that it's going to be the sunniest up on top of that. Okay, and it's cool when you have all these different yellows mixing together. They're mixing in the water. Okay, so now I'm going to grab a little bit of blue, and I'm going to go with my ultramarine blue and put it right into the yellows that I'm using because that's going to give us a really nice green. It's always better to mix up your own greens too. Depending on which yellow I mix this into, of course, it's going to change the color green. So if I mix that into my lemon yellow, I'm going to get this color green right here. I mixed that into this nickel color, get this green. And I'll tell you, here's a little hint. Core watercolor set I'm using has this nickel yellow. Here it is. And if I mix, of all things, Payne's gray into that, I get a beautiful hooker green. So you would not necessarily expect that mixing mixing yellow and gray would get you this beautiful green, but it does. Okay, so this is still wet, and I know that when I put the stems in, it's going to bleed a little bit, but I want that look. I don't always want that look, but right now I want that look. I think it's going to look neat. So just using the very tip of my brush, I'm going to start, that was a little bit too much, so I'm going to soak a little bit of that up. I'm going to start just putting that illusion of a stem in there. Okay, so we can see that things aren't just floating. And you could switch your brush size if you wanted to do something a little bit finer if you're not confident in using a bigger brush. But just going to start adding those stems in here. And I'm not even doing a heavy-handed, like a full stem. It's really just the hint of it in between where that white space is, in between those blossoms. Okay? Just add a little stem. You know, and in nature, sometimes the greens and the other colors will mix together, and as it transitions from a stem to a leaf or from a stem to a flower, sometimes you'll see that. Especially when we do Indian paintbrush next week, you'll see that a lot. The flower petals on an Indian paintbrush flower are just green, and then there's a line where they change to red. It's a really interesting flower. Okay, so you can see how that's bleeding together a little bit, but it still looks pretty neat. And then I'm going to have my stem come down out of there like that. And now it's time to add some leaves in. Okay, so like I said, the bottom part of Goldenrod is very leaf heavy. And they're kind of, what's the word? Kind of, it's not ruffly, but they're kind of loose, I guess, is the best word I can think of, where they kind of flop around a lot. So they're not stiff leaves like a peony leaf. And again, remember, you don't want things just coming out of the sides. You want to also have things in the background. In the back, it would be coming out just flat. We would barely see that, and maybe we'd see the tip of it folded over back there. And the same for the front. You know, you can imagine if there's a leaf coming out of the front right here, we're really just going to see the wide part of it, and maybe it's just going to come down to that narrow tip. Okay, so you do want to change the shapes a little bit so that you can see the different angles. Okay, and I'm just changing the pressure on my brush as I do this. I'm just kind of going with the tip of my brush a little bit and then pushing down to get those leaf shapes and kind of wiggling my brush as I do that. Some of the leaves will be a little smaller than others. You can mix some of the other green colors into here if you want, so I can just drop a little bit of that, the other greens that I mixed up into here. Okay, and I'm pretty happy with how this is turning out. It's very loose, right? You've been watching. I didn't do a drawing ahead of time. It's very loose. It's very flowing. And that's different from, a very tight botanical kind of drawing. But sometimes it's fun to just paint like this. And I found it to be very frustrating when I first started painting that I couldn't just pick up a brush and paint something. So I always think that this kind of tutorial is pretty useful just so you can see how it's done and get some tips because, that's just something I found irritating at the beginning. I wanted to be able to paint right away and I couldn't. So I like to get people, if they're just starting, I like to get them painting pretty much right away because that's how you'll learn. You'll learn by doing it. Okay, I think this looks pretty good. What do you guys think? I like the way this looks. I haven't ever painted goldenrod like this before, so I wasn't totally sure this would work, and I'm glad it did. I mean, technology might not work, but I'm fairly confident in painting flowers, so at least I got that. I'm dropping some darker green in. I just mixed a little green or a little more gray paint into that mixture just so I could get some more shadows. You might want to make your stem a little bit darker so that you get those highlights, lowlights in there. Remember that contrast is the thing that makes paintings pop. So I'm going to add just a little bit of that darker green in. And some of this paint is still wet up here, which again, normally I would be like, oh, that's too much water. But with this particular technique, it's fun to watch what the water does. I'll have to post a photo later so you can see when it's completely dry what it looks like. But you see how adding those darker colors in really makes it pop. And then you can always go back in when it's dry and take a little more paint and add a few more details, right? You can always add a few little lines, little dashes in there. Okay, make it look like all of those things that give us allergies all season long, all those little pollen sprigs. I actually love goldenrod. I have been known to go out and pick a bunch of goldenrod and bring it into the house and then immediately regret it when I start to sneeze. But it's pretty and I like it. I don't really like that pale pastel yellow very much. That's not one of my favorite colors, but I love these deep golden colors. I think they're so pretty. I'm going to put a little bit darker here just to show that there's something going on behind the stem as well. Okay, now here's a key. You have to know when to stop playing with things too and when to let it dry, and then you can go back to it later. So remember, if you keep playing with it, it'll get muddy. So this is a good point to stop and not go on too much. Let me check what we have in the comments here. I saw a few things coming in. Okay. So a few of you are saying you feel stronger with your drawing skills than your watercolor skills, and that is so normal. And what I say, and the way I taught myself originally, is practice your drawing if you feel stronger with it. Draw it and then trace over it with a with a waterproof pen. So this is an example of a waterproof pen I like to use, and it will say water and fade proof pigment ink on it. This is one, Micron is another brand, looks like this. That says archival ink, and then it says waterproof and fade proof here. So do your drawing, trace over it with that, and then go ahead and paint in that because it's a lot easier to do that than to do the painting right off the bat. Okay, let's see what else. Leaves always ruin it for me, says Sandy. Leaves are hard. I mean, it takes a while, but once you get it, you get it. And so I would just grab a piece of paper and practice your leaves. And remember that the way you're going to get your leaves looking good is if you have different pressure. So you start with just the tip of it, and then I'm just, wiggling my brush and coming up to the tip, and that looks like a pretty good leaf, and I haven't overcomplicated it, okay? And then you can, while it's wet, you can add in some different colors into it, and then just let it dry and see what it does, okay? Okay, Debbie says, I love this. I'm watching and hoping mine will come out anywhere close to this. Well, I bet it will. You just have to practice and then post it for all of us to see. And Alice says showing contrast helps. Yes, that is a main key to painting and drawing, is having contrast. Without contrast, things just are going to look flat and boring and dull. And now before I switch this back to our other camera view here, I just want to zoom in, if I can, and show you how the water is drying on this. So you see how it's all mixing together. If I picked this up, it would all mix together too much and be quite muddy. But you can see how, because I had a lot of water in those droplets, the pigment is just evaporating. Have a great weekend. Bye.